I'd like to call to order the May 11th, 2021 meeting of the Planning and Zoning Commission. Courtney, could you take roll call, please? Sure.
Misty Soldwich.
Here.
Sarah Ritchie.
Here.
Joe Butler. Al Ferris.
Here.
Aaron Freeberg.
Here.
Becky Needles.
Here.
Bob Ormsby.
Here.
Jeremy Preble. And Josh Ray.
Here.
So first is the approval of the agenda. Does anyone have any questions? And if not, we will entertain a motion.
I'll make a motion to approve the agenda as written.
Do we have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All right, next is approval of the minutes for the April 13th, 2021 meeting. Does anyone have any questions about the minutes or comments? If not, we'd entertain a motion to approve the minutes.
I'll motion to, this is Becky, I'll motion to approve the minutes from the April meeting.
Do we have a second?
This is Sarah. I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
So moved. The next item on the agenda is public comments. This would be for anything that is not currently on the agenda. Was there anyone with a public comment for a non-agenda item? Number 6, old business. Is there any old business, Charlie?
Nothing that we have tonight.
Okay. So number 7, new business. Item A is consider recommendation on a request for approval of a plat of survey for William Jones located within 2 miles of the city of Indianola. Charlie?
Yeah, the Jones own a little over 50 acres of land currently outside the city of Indianola, located just to the southwest. In total, their property does contain 2 dwellings and 2 outbuildings. They propose to split one of the dwellings and one of the outbuildings off onto a 2-acre parcel. As it is for residential purposes with an existing structure, it does require approval by the Planning Commission and then ultimately the City Council. The comprehensive plan does call for the area as agricultural, so it is not within a priority growth area of the city, and as such, we would recommend approval of the plat survey.
Any questions or discussion? Is there anyone in the audience that had a comment about this agenda item? Would anyone like to give us a motion on this one?
This is Josh Ray. I'll make a motion to approve the plat of survey as submitted.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Courtney?
Sarah Ritchie,
Yes.
Al Ferris,
Yes.
Aaron Freeberg. Yes. Becky Needles,
Yes.
Bob Ormsby.
Yes.
Josh Rabe,
Yes.
Misty Soldwich.
Yes. So moved. The next item, B, consider recommendation on request for approval of a plat of survey for Justin and Jenna Brown located at 800 West Orchard Avenue, Lot 16 of Heritage Hills 9, and 1602 West Scenic Valley Drive, Lot 17 of Heritage Hills 9. Charlie?
Yeah, I apologize for the on the agenda. It was funny. Courtney and I earlier today saw that and told Courtney it wouldn't be a big deal, and I was wrong, so I apologize for that. But
Sorry.
Justin and Jenna Brown currently own lot 16 and 17 in Heritage Hills, plat 9. That was a plat, I believe, that was reviewed and approved by the commission and council back in 2018. Lot 16 is a little over 20,000 square feet. Lot 17 is just a little over 22,000 square feet. Lot 16 currently has an active building permit issued to it for a new single-family dwelling, while 17 is vacant. The property owner does propose to combine these two lots into one, creating just under an acre, 0.99 acre parcel. All aspects of Chapter 170 would continue to be met with this, as well as the minimum standards for the R5 zoning district. The comprehensive plan does call for this area as low density residential. So with that, we are recommending alternative 1, approving the plat of survey request as submitted.
Misty, real quick, I'm going to recuse myself of this one. I'll be back for the next one.
All right. Do we have any discussion or questions on this item? Anyone in the audience that wanted to make a comment on this one? Or questions? If not, would someone like to entertain a motion? We would entertain a motion.
This is Sarah. I'll make a motion to approve alternative 1, the approve as submitted. Sorry.
This is Bob. I'll second.
Courtney?
Al Ferris,
Yes.
Aaron Freeberg. Yes. Becky Needles,
Yes.
Bob Ormsby.
Yes.
Misty Soldwich,
Yes.
Sarah Ritchie.
Yes.
So moved. Item 7C, consider request from Peterson Funeral Service, Inc., doing business as Overton Funeral Home, for a right-of-way vacation and conveyance of a portion of the east-west alley that lies between lots 1, 2, 3, and lots 10, 11, 12, and a portion of the north-south alley that lies between lots 3 and 4, all in block 14 of the plat of Jones and Wendell's addition to Indianola, Warren County, Iowa. Charlie, information about this one?
Yeah, really quick, and I know it's been over a year actually since we've done any right-of-way vacations or alley vacations as a commission. So I just quickly first wanted to kind of bring everybody up to speed on what's required with that. So code does require that the Planning and Zoning Commission make a recommendation to the City Council regarding any right-of-way vacation, alley vacation. In the findings, the findings that are required should say that, first of all, that the street, alley, or portion thereof, or any public ground proposed to be vacated is no longer needed for the use of the public, and therefore the maintenance at the public expense is no longer justified, and that the proposed vacation will not deny owners of property abutting on the street or alley reasonable access to their property. Just wanted to bring those two items up because I think it does relate generally to the analysis that we have on this one, but The alley that's proposed to be vacated is currently an improved alley that currently sits between ground that is owned wholly by the property owner. As you may recall, on the south portion of this, along Salem and D, there used to be 3 single-family dwellings that stood each on one lot. I think 2 of those single-family dwellings have been demolished, and I believe there are plans to demolish the 3rd here in the future. On the north side of those lots does include the Peterson Funeral Home, and then they also do own the single-family dwelling that is just to the west of the north-south alley that's also proposed to be vacated. Since the owner does own land on both sides of the alleys, and since there is still access to the east-west alley west of this proposed area, the alley proposed to be vacated, the alley is proposed to be vacated, no longer needed for the use of the public. However, the applicant does intend to issue access easements to the property owners who are still using that east-west alley that is just to the west of here. And I know I did talk with him this morning, and I know he's here as well today to speak on that. But I believe those easement documents have been signed by both him and the property owners. So the only other thing that we had on there, that there are currently a few public utilities that are in these, some electrical utilities, and I believe some fiber utilities as well that are underground. So with that, we would want to get a public utility easement issued before vacating this. So staff does recommend alternative to approving it with condition, and that condition being that the public utility easement be granted to the city prior to the vacation being executed. Essentially what we'll do with that, if this is moved forward, is the city will issue an easement to ourselves before we give the alley to the requested property owner. So if there's any questions on that, I'd be happy to answer them.
Does anyone have any questions for Charlie or any comments? Is there anyone in the audience that would like to make a comment or ask any questions?
You're fine. It's up to you.
If you could approach and give your name and address, please.
Jeff Peterson, 501 West Ashland Avenue, owner of Overton Funeral Home, Peterson Funeral Service Inc. So the purpose of this is we're in the process of an addition to the funeral home. And I know some of the preliminary architectural designs are with the city, and also going to make some changes to our garage as far as the entrance into the garage. So it's all about the addition to the funeral home, hoping to get started on that later this year. So that's the purpose of the alley purchase.
Great, thank you. Does anyone have any questions for him? All right, thank you. Any further discussion? If not, I would entertain a motion.
This is Becky. I recommend the commission approve alternative plan 2, approving the right-of-way vacation request with the condition that a public utility easement granted to the city prior to the vacation being executed.
Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Any further discussion? Courtney, roll call?
Tom Ferris,
Yes.
Aaron Freeberg, yes. Becky Needles,
Yes.
Bob Ormsby,
Yes.
Josh Ray,
Yes.
Misty Soldwish,
Yes.
and Sarah Ritchie.
Yes.
All right, item D, consider recommendation on request for approval of a preliminary plat for Prairie Glen Plat 3.
This preliminary plat for Prairie Glen Plat 3 does create 19 single-family lots. The commission, I think, will recall Prairie Glen Plat 2 was final platted last year. This portion of this development is just north of Plat 2. The subdivision does propose that East Girard would be extended to the east of North 15th Street, where it will be stubbed in at the east end of this development. North 17th Street will also be continued north, while it will terminate in a T intersection with East Girard. This plat does create 2 outlots, one of which will be used for stormwater management at the northeast corner of the intersection of Girard and 15th. And then the other outlet, which will be reserved for future development between this addition and Iowa Avenue to the north. Excuse me. The proposed single-family development does provide for an average density of about 3.41 units per acre. Staff has reviewed the plat to its conformance to the regulations with Chapter 170. We've also used Snyder and Associates to review the stormwater management plan and features of this subdivision. Did note here that the applicant has also submitted construction documents at this point, and we are in the process of reviewing those as well. But all comments pertaining to the preliminary plat have been satisfied from our end. So we are presenting the preliminary plat to the commission today. We do recommend moving alternative 1, which is to approve the preliminary plat as submitted. And if there are any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Any questions for Charlie? Is there anyone in the audience that wanted to make a comment or have questions about this? All right, so would anyone like to make a motion on this?
I move we recommend the preliminary plat be approved as submitted.
First, is there a second?
I'll second that.
All in favor? Courtney?
Aaron Freeberg,
Yes.
Becky Needles,
Yes.
Bob Ormsby,
Yes.
Josh Rabe,
Yes.
Misty Soldwich,
Yes.
Sarah Ritchie,
Yes.
and Al Ferris.
Yes.
All right. Item E, consider recommendation on request for approval of a preliminary plat for Heritage Hills Plat 11.
Heritage Hills Plat 11 is just north of Heritage Hills Plat 9. Don't get too confused with the number, and you'll recall Plat 10 actually north of a golf course was done in between these 2 developments. But Plat 11 does propose 9 single-family lots, which will all be accessed by a new internal cul-de-sac, North G Street, which will extend northwest from where it is currently stubbed in just north of West Orchard. This plat also does create an outlot, which is located on the west side, that is going to be used for stormwater management. When we look at density on this subdivision with the proposed single family development, it does provide an average density of about 1.2 units per acre. Staff has reviewed the plat to its conformance with Chapter 170, and again, Snyder and Associates has provided their assistance on the review of the stormwater management features of this. As of the writing of the staff report, there were a few comments outstanding on both the preliminary plat and the stormwater management plan. However, as we noted, none of those comments will have an effect on the design of the subdivision that has been presented. Furthermore, I will add today we did receive revised plat and stormwater management plan from the applicant. So we're in the process of reviewing those revisions right now. With that, we would recommend moving alternative 2, which is to recommend the preliminary plat be approved with conditions, and the condition being that all outstanding staff comments on the preliminary plat have been satisfied before review by the by the city council. So any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Misty, I'm going to sit out the next 2 as well.
Okay,
Thank you.
we'll see you later. Any questions or information needed from Charlie on this? Is there anyone in the audience that has a comment or question? Would anyone like to give us a motion on this? How about you, Al?
I'll make a motion to recommend the preliminary plat be approved with the following conditions: that the city council review the recommendations once all outstanding staff comments on the preliminary plat have been satisfied.
All right, do we have a second?
I'll second.
Courtney, roll call for this?
Becky Needles,
Yes.
Bob Ormsby.
Yes.
Misty Soldridge,
Yes.
Sarah Ritchie,
Yes.
Al Ferris,
Yes.
Aaron Freeberg. Yes.
All right. Next on the agenda, item F, consider recommendation on request for approval of a preliminary plat for Fox Run Plat 2.
This preliminary plat does create 11 single-family lots and one multifamily lot. That one multifamily lot does contain 36 units within it. Those 36 units are spread over 6 buildings that all each contain 6 row units within each of them. The development will be assessed by a new internal road that will essentially connect North 7th Court. I have street in the staff report, I apologize for that, but it's North 7th Court and East Norwood Avenue. And it also does propose a private hammerhead drive for the 36 multifamily units that would come off that public road. The plat does also create an outlot located on the north side that will be used for stormwater management. The proposed development does provide for an average density of about 4.51 units per acre. I know the commission's familiar with this area of town from both the Kading proposal and then the Williams Terrace proposal that has come through, but the comprehensive plan does identify that a park would be located generally in this area, mainly on the north side of this property and then into the next property as well to the north. In conversations that we've had through some pre-development meetings on this subdivision and with the applicant, the property owner does wish to donate outlot X to the city for a future park ground once the detention is put in place. Again, as with all the subdivisions that we have, we reviewed them as they're to their conformance with Chapter 170. Fox Engineering has also provided professional assistance on this, reviewing the stormwater management plan. The reason Snyder hasn't done that is because they were the one who created the preliminary plat, so we always kind of go to an outside agency at that point. Same thing as the last one, as of the writing of the staff report, there were a few outstanding comments on the preliminary plat and the stormwater management plan. However, just like the last one, none of those were to the effect that it was going to change any of the design of the overall subdivision. It was just clarifying a few minor things. So with that, we are recommending that the Planning and Zoning Commission move alternative 2, and that's recommending with conditions, and that condition being that all outstanding staff comments on the preliminary plat be satisfied before the City Council review. So with that, if there are any questions, I would be happy to answer them.
Any questions for Charlie or comments?
Yeah, Charlie, this is Bob. In looking at this area, Cabot Creek, does that run right through here, and is it being collected in this detention area? Is that how I'm reading this?
Yep. So the kind of one of the beginnings of Cabot Creek does begin on this property. It actually begins somewhat on that Kading property that is just to the east of here, flows down to the west, kind of underneath the highway, around the orchard area and that intersection through the golf course, where it actually then does go into the actual Cabot Creek. I think Cabot Creek officially does go more north and south, and this is just kind of like a piece to that. But yes, that is true. I know that the area that the detention basin is being proposed in at one point, not too terribly long ago, was actually kind of a pond in some way, shape, or form, but the dam for that pond somehow was broken and just kind of allowed that free flow in the pond to be dried up. But if you look at elevations, the existing elevations, it does kind of present itself that at some point it was a pond.
And so it looks like typically it will hold water up to 914. Is that what I'm reading here?
Let me look at the plat here. I don't got it right.
Looks like the normal pool's at 914, so it will be a pond.
Yeah, and I think, and I know the applicant can speak on that a little bit too, but my understanding is that it is set up to be a pond and hold water to some level there. And then when we've looked at this and when we've talked about it internally as far as a future park, We understand that, and I believe there is some ability, once we get possibly more ground on the north side of this, to kind of increase the size of that as well, as the city sees fit with the new park ground.
So is Cabot Creek kind of a natural watershed? I mean, is it fall under any jurisdiction with DNR? I mean, do they have any guidelines about how those are dealt with? And
I'm not 100% sure on that. I don't know if that was part of Fox Engineering's review on that at all, and I can check into that. But right off the top of my head, I don't know if that's got any jurisdiction under the DNR or not.
I think it's worth confirming.
I don't know if the applicant could speak on that at all either.
I can. Okay, come up now, or-
Please do. If you could state your name and address.
I will gladly. Josh Rabe, 311 North B Street. I'm here representing Johansson Enterprises, the owner, Downey Construction. We're developing it with them. Bob, we have done some initial looking into the DNR, and it came back as not being an area that's controlled by that. We do have money in the budget that if that does come up on further review from Fox, if we miss something, that it is accounted for, that we will make sure that we do the proper research and engineering for that.
So you have had contact with the DNR then?
Correct.
Okay.
Does anyone else have any questions or comments directed to Josh?
I'm curious about, has the Parks Department been contacted? Are they agreeable with accepting this property?
Yeah, and Charlie can speak more to that. We've been in discussion for months with the city on how to develop this parcel. There are a lot of unique challenges presented here, and we've been working closely with them to try to find the best way to utilize that, knowing that there's a desire for parks in that area. We've been exploring that and working with the parks in the city to create that opportunity and kind of start hoping the first domino in that area, as well as for maybe developers in the town to actually develop parkland with their developments going forward.
Yeah, and I'll just add quickly, we weren't able to get it on the agenda for the Parks and Rec Commission for their May meeting, so we do intend to bring it forward to them at their June meeting for their input on the proposal.
I don't see any access for the public.
We have
To that
access
property.
on the preliminary plat from throughout the development at 2 different points, and then it would tie into the future trail easements and any future development there.
Okay.
We've left access, so there is trail access for the public there, absolutely.
What's the density standard for this property?
Again, the zoning ordinance doesn't have any density standards. If you're discussing the comp plan, give me 1 second and I'll bring that up. I know it's within the range, but I don't know what the exact numbers are. So just give me 1 second here and I'll pull that up. If there's any other questions, go ahead.
Yeah,
I think
related to density. If the developer were to give that property, that piece of property to the park, to the city, then would that change the density standard because you would be removing 183,589 square feet of the property? And it seems to me that would change the density calculation on the development.
Yeah, I mean, the issue with the density is we don't necessarily define exactly anywhere how density is calculated. So you've got the option between using, net density or gross density. So when we're looking at it and how we've always calculated density, every time we present developments, it's based off whatever that property's acreage is, and then whatever many units are going into that. So we've never discounted anything. Same thing, I think when we look at other properties is, I don't think we really pay attention too close to who the ownership is, but if there's ever an outlot that's involved in a subdivision, we've always discounted, we've never discounted those outlets if they're used for stormwater management or anything like that. Going back to other site plans that we looked at, same exact thing. We've never discounted land for any reason on there. So,
Well, the reason I'm asking is because the area that would hold the 36 units, it looks a lot like the proposed Cabot Creek development, which the commission turned down because of the density. And it's not all that far away from the proposed Cabot Creek development. I am concerned about consistency. That in one case we turned down, I voted to turn it down, a development. Yet this one looks to me like it, at least in the area where those 36 units are going to be, just as dense as that one. It pose problems for us?
As far as, are you saying, what, when you say problems, I guess define those problems?
Legal problems?
I wouldn't think so, no. Every individual case that we look at is held to its own merits. You know, I don't want to go back over the other one, the Kading proposal. I think there were some very particular reasons, not just density, where ultimately council denied that one, and I think same reasons that the commission presented. But you know, there was concerns of not enough open space, you know, and I think just the general buffering from a single family neighborhood over. And I'm not sure that the same thing is happening with this one. There is some single family that has proposed this that's going to actually help buffer some of the existing single family, but at the same time, you know, there is some single family to the east of here as well. But I think there is some proper setback on that, and then to the south of here too. And I'm getting my directions mixed up. There's existing units, and I know you can probably speak to that, Josh, but I think the intent is to match the existing units that are just south of here to what is proposed.
Absolutely, and I guess we kind of jumped right into the DNR question. You know, the goal of this project is to infill a piece of ground that has a lot of potential and needs connecting to the city. We've worked with Charlie early on this to manage some of that density. Our initial proposal looked at potentially some duplexes where those single family lots are, as a just looking at what is going to work best for the city. We put those all to single family. That way anybody purchasing there will know what they're buying, right? You won't be putting multifamily right up against a existing single family home to ease that burden for folks. You know, this is an extension of a product just one street over, Fox Run, that has been very successful, and has a very high occupancy rate and a very low complaint rate, I guess is the best way to say that delicately, that some other properties in the area don't have the same track record. But we're just simply trying to put more quality rentals with garages and access to open space. Again, we talked about the outlot. We looked at just keeping the outlot for the project. Ultimately, in discussion with the city, you know, in the plans there, one of the concerns that the city has is with outlots that get created and then just left to their own devices. We felt like this was a win-win for everybody. Initially, yes, that ground helps our calculation density potentially, but it's all done with the bigger vision in mind to try to create the right area for folks, and ultimately space that this development and a lot of town can utilize. So.
There's the same developer that did the houses, units right immediately adjacent to the south, isn't it?
Correct.
That's a lot less dense there.
But yeah, I mean,
What was the total number of units, and that being the concern of Alan on this one, what was the total number of units proposed for the Kading one? It was significantly higher, because I know just the second smaller piece was 12 units in that very small area, and then across the street.
Let me, if you give me just 1 second, I'll take a look at that. Going back to the density thing, why I have it up here too, it is considered to be low to medium density residential, which does allow for the comp plan up to 15 units per acre. But let me go back to
feels really weird, like they're all looking at the back of my head,
I know.
sitting here right now. I know Bob's just staring at my bald head.
So as you recall, there was Cabot Creek 1, Cabot Creek 2 on that. Cabot Creek 1 proposed a single family dwelling and 8 2-family units, so a total of 17 units. And Cabot Creek 2 proposed 1 single family unit, 20 2-family units, and 13 multifamily units. That all added up between those two developments to be a total of 136 units.
Has the fire chief okayed this with the Hammerhead development there?
We did a couple different designs to make sure that we had the fire department's blessing. Like the third or fourth iteration is what's on there. Make sure we're good.
Yeah, any of all these preliminary plats that have been in front of you this evening, we run them through all our department heads who deal in development. So IMU, sanitary sewer, streets, and all of that stuff. And they've got a chance to offer comments on there. So
Any comments from them on just the increased flow of traffic that will be created with this higher density through here?
nope, we didn't have anything pertaining to that at all. I think, again, it's kind of within our identified density standards within the comp plan that took a look at that overall. So not many not many foreseen issues on that. And even with that, I'll go back to, again, the Katie proposal. There was an actual traffic study that was done for those 136 units, and even, not a traffic study, but a traffic impact analysis. There is a difference. And even that traffic impact analysis noted that with those 136 units, that we would not have a major increase in traffic with those. So it does provide some perspective. But when you're looking at this one, again, you're looking at would be total of 47 units. And typically, I think you look at what that would generate per trip per unit and all of that, and it's not a terribly high increase to the daily traffic counts on those roads.
I assume the adjacent neighbors were notified of this plan.
Yep. So
only one comment was received.
yeah, and I know Courtney got that to everybody today. We did get one later this afternoon, but that was the only one that we did receive.
I will disclose the Freeze family reached out to me directly, and we talked, and they had no concerns to come tonight to talk about their property directly to the north.
Can I go back to the detention? Another question. When sizing that, does it take into effect also the existing flow of the creek? Is it factored into the size, or it's strictly then based on the development of the project?
Yeah, so the design of any stormwater management, it'll take into effect all of those. It'll also take a look at what our code says is a 5-year rain event. That will also be calculated into that. So you've got to take a look at what the site currently does, what it will do with a 5-year event, and then also what any impervious surface that is added, any storm sewers that are added to that, and how that water will be directed in there, and that is how that is engineered in size. So yes, that does come into account on that, and that is something that Fox Engineering has reviewed on our behalf.
All right, thanks.
Any other comments or questions directed to Josh Ray?
I was going to add, just for clarification, recalling the Katie conversation that we had, one of the concerns was parking along the street, in addition to the flow of snow plows, garbage trucks. Do you want to comment on that, just so that we have that on record? Was that taken into consideration? Do you feel like that's going to be pretty simple?
Yeah, and I can comment on it. So the zoning requires that there be 2 parking spaces per unit provided. They have a single car garage on each one, right? A single car garage in each one, and then a driveway space as well. Our code does state that that one parking space cannot be located within the front yard setback. However, since this is a private drive, this is exactly what we did with Katie as well. That standard only applies to that front setback along the public road. So they are able to provide those spots in the driveway and within the garage. So they all are provided. If there's additional spots that are needed after that, I believe that private drive, and I'm just going to pull it back up here.
We do have a few extra spots.
Yeah, I was going to say, I believe that was still designed to hold some on-street parking, private on-street parking.
Correct. And that's part of the reasoning for the private drive on that part. It alleviates the burden of the city for the snow removal. The public stays on the main thoroughfare. There is some additional opportunity for on-street parking. We have provided some additional parking stalls. We're looking at trying to slip a few more in there if we can. Find that balance of green space and concrete. But certainly, Sarah, we've done our best to account for the fact that the snowplow should be able to go down North 7th. I think that's what you guys are going to call it.
And we're splitting it.
Yeah.
Splitting it on the curb somewhere.
Somewhere on the curve, it's going to switch over to Norwood. But keep that open as public and then create a nice private area for this dwelling units.
Thank you.
Any other questions directed to Josh Rabe? Any other comments for us?
Thank
Okay,
you.
thank you. Any other discussion or questions? Is there anyone else in the audience that had a comment or question about this agenda item? Oh, yes, please. To the podium.
Take me a while to get there.
No problem. If you could give us your name and your address, please.
My name is Doyle Norris, and I live at 1304 North 7th. My questions, I received this letter from the Planning and Zoning Commission that on the backside, it's got an aerial view with a blue box. And I come here tonight and we were talking about houses and units and streets. It's hard for me to determine here where everything's going. Is there a way I can get it? Or have somebody come here and
If
just
you're
draw some loose?
Looks like Charlie's going to put it on the screen
if
here.
you're able to kind of see on the screen there, let me zoom out a little bit here. So that property that we showed outlined in the blue on the back of that map is generally kind of where this black line is right here. So, and let me go up on another one. This one's actually able to be viewed a little better because it doesn't show all the elevations on it, but you can see the single family. Can you see where the pointer is on the screen here? But the single family is all located along this curved road into here. And then those multifamily are all back in this area here. And for perspective, the top here is north, East Lincoln would be south of here on the bottom of the screen.
Proposed part for the
Yep, that would be in this area up here, so probably shows better here, but you can kind of see where that pond area is back in there. It would be on that lot back in there.
All right. I've got Parkinson's, so you gotta kind of bear with me a little bit. I'm not understanding the parking situation. I live over there, and if you drive down, or the Lincoln, no.
The east-west road?
Yeah,
Yeah, it's Lincoln.
go through there on a weeknight or on a Sunday night especially, and you can't drive down there. It's weaving in and out. It's not that way all day, I understand that. But it is, and if everybody has the right number of parking spots, that's fine, but that doesn't mean you're using them.
Mhm.
And it's pretty, it's hard to get through. We don't go down that way anymore just because it took us forever to just to, go through that section street.
And on Lincoln, if I understand correctly, it's this design, but on a public road, and this proposal is this design, but that drive would be private rather than a thoroughfare?
Yep, exactly.
This. Sorry. This right here,
Yes.
Yep, that's
Not
all.
that's not a city street.
okay. All right. Thank you for planning a part on that side, because open is short on that side, plus with the amount of children in the area, they tend to run the kids, that's all. They don't tear stuff up. It's be nice to have a place for them. The other question I have is off of 7th Court. That's a ditch there. As it goes, a pretty good sized ditch.
Are you talking off the stub there
Yes,
and then back down into that area?
yes.
And I think, so if you, let me pull this one back up right here. Again, and it might be hard to kind of tell where these elevations are, but once you drop back into where that creek is, that kind of generally runs from about this point here and then out, that is a ditch. Most of the development that they're proposing is on the south side. So really before you get down into that ditch.
What about the ditch that's, I guess maybe I'm not, but is it, have to be on the stub there's a ditch that goes pretty deep there. Matter of fact, I think there's a culvert at the end of 7th Court, at the stub there.
Yeah,
And it's pretty deep. Where's that water gonna go?
And so when the new road's put in, what they'll do is they'll put storm sewer throughout that and they'll catch it within the road and they'll pipe it then down into this detention basin. And that detention basin has been engineered, calculated to be able to handle that type of stormwater. So most likely what's happening, I'd have to look at it. My guess is with that stub road, you've got stormwater running off it. It's probably been happening for years and it's kind of created its own swale to get down into that creek bottom. So
It's pretty deep.
Yep. So what this would do is, they'd work on kind of grading that area back out, getting it, flat, and then putting that new road in with the storm sewers. And then they'll pipe all of that water down into this detention basin.
Okay. All right. I think that's all the questions I've got. And I guess if I have more, I'm in your office.
Yes, anytime.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Any other questions or discussion? Would someone like to make a motion?
Well, I think it has been a nice attempt to try to preserve the feel of a single residence along the road and kind of tucking the higher density kind of off it. So I applaud the way that's been done. I'm always concerned with a little higher density in this area just because we've had issues with it, but it is a much less denser project than we've looked at in the past. So with that, I will make a motion to approve, and I believe that was based on staff comments, correct? The recommendation?
Yeah, the one condition we recommended was just to hold off on council review until all the preliminary plat comments have been satisfied.
But he said.
Do we have a second?
I'll second. This is Sarah.
Any further discussion before we vote? All right, Courtney?
Misty Solowich,
Yes.
Sarah Ritchie,
Yes.
Al Farah,
No,
Aaron Freeberg. Yes. Becky Needles,
Yes.
Bob Wormsby.
Yes.
All right. Next item on the agenda is Item 7G, consider request from Groundbreaker Homes to rezone property located in the southwest quarter of Section 29, Township 76 North, Range 23 West, from A1 agricultural to R3 mixed residential.
Yeah, again, we're looking at a request here to rezone approximately 30 acres of land, which is currently located in the A1 agricultural zoning district. And that would be a request to change to the R3 mixed residential zoning district. This rezoning is being requested, obviously, to facilitate a future residential development. Looking at the city's comprehensive plan elevating Indianola, it does identify this property as community mixed use. Community mixed use does call for low to medium density residential uses. That would include up to 15 units per acre. Low to medium density residential uses may incorporate a mix of housing types, including single family detached, single family attached, multifamily, and student housing. When looking at community mixed use, it also does promote some civic uses and commercial uses within there as well. But again, the proposal that, or at least the concept that we've been presented does just call for this to be residential at this time. So that concept that we have looked at does call for 74 units, which is roughly in the southwest section of this property. Of those 74 units, 26 of them would be single family and 48 would be townhome units. Looking at this, we don't have any calculations on acreages or anything like that. We're just looking at a base concept, but we're able to kind of look at that and estimate that it'd be about 4.2 units per acre. This property does border South 15th Street on the west side, East Plainview Avenue on the south side. It should be noted that East Plainview Avenue is actually the southern city border in this area. South 15th Street is paved to its intersection with East Plainview, while East Plainview is a gravel surface road. The property is bordered by the Indianola School athletic fields to the west, Windsor Manor, which is an assisted living community, to the northwest, and then agricultural land throughout the rest of the border. The Indianola School District property is zoned that R3 mixed residential, while Windsor Manor is zoned R5, and everything else surrounding this, including the land out in the county, is zoned A1 agricultural. Looking at utility service, we do have sanitary sewer service within South 15th Street, and that sewer line is stubbed into a manhole, which is located just north of the intersection of 15th and Plainview. It's a pretty deep sewer as well, too. So based off that, there does appear to be sufficient sanitary sewer depth in the manhole to be able to service most of the portion of this ground. When you do get more towards the northeast portion of this ground, the elevation does start falling off a little bit. So most likely something's going to have to be engineered in that portion at some point in the future if it is ever developed. Water service is stubbed in just to the north of here. It is stubbed in right where that Windsor Manor facility is located. With that, we did note that we've placed notification signs on here and did mail letters within everybody within 200 feet on April 30th. So that was well within that 10-day period that we're required to do that. And if any rezoning were to be approved, obviously the proposed development would be subject to all subdivision requirements of the city of Indianola, which would require a review by the Planning and Zoning Commission. So with that, we are recommending that the commission move alternative 1, which is approving the rezoning request as submitted. The one thing I will note, obviously, the next item that we have on here is looking at the zoning code updates. With that, you'll get this presentation here in a little bit, but we're looking at some changes in what the actual zoning district will be called. So we did have a request in front of us. We did talk to our legal on this. We are bringing this forward. At some point in the future, we're going to be looking at an amended zoning map where we may change the zoning designation on this, but the intent of what the developer is looking at to develop will work with them and making sure we put the appropriate zoning district on that. So just wanted to clarify that point before moving forward, but if there's any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Does anyone have any comments or questions for Charlie?
Does that mean the new R3 description could be applied to this property? The new R3 classification standards?
We'll get into that a little bit, but the R3 is not going to be that mix of single family duplexes and multifamily.
Yeah.
We're really clarifying kind of what those residential uses are per district. When I look at this, since there are townhomes, I believe that the R2 district that we'll be proposing allows for single family plus row townhomes. So I would think it would be something similar to that, as long as the applicant doesn't have any intention on doing multifamily units anywhere on this, we should be okay. But I just need to clarify with them at some point.
So would it take their agreement to do that?
No, I mean, as we've talked about this with the new zoning map, the one thing that's imperative on us, especially with the current R3 zoning district, is to go through all of that and make sure that we are not making any changes that are going to create legally non-conforming uses, essentially uses that are grandfathered in. So we'll work with them, and we'll work with probably a few property owners on that just to make sure that we're getting that new zoning map right. But that's something that'll be reviewed by the commission, probably, hopefully at your next meeting.
Thank you.
Is there anyone in the audience that wanted to comment or have questions on this agenda item? Any other comments or questions from the commissioners? Would someone like to make a motion?
This is Josh Ray. I'll make a motion to approve the request as submitted.
Do we have a second?
This is Becky. I will second it.
Any further discussion before we vote? Courtney?
Bob Ormsby,
Yes.
Josh Rabe,
Yes.
Mitzi Solowich,
Yes.
Sarah Ritchie,
Yes.
Al Ferris,
Yes.
Aaron Freeberg. Yes. Becky Needle.
Yes.
All right, next item, 7H, consider recommendation on amendments to chapter 165 zoning regulations and chapter 166 site plan.
And before we give it off to Chris, I just kind of want to quickly summarize this process. Obviously, the commission's fully aware we've been working on this particular process for about a year, but when you incorporate this in with the new comprehensive plan, this has been something that's been ongoing for at least the whole time I've been here, about 2.5 years now. Obviously, last May, the council adopted Elevating Genoa, which is the city's comprehensive plan. Based on the review, based on that comprehensive plan, we are proposing various amendments to chapter 165, 166, and a few other codes as well. Phase 1 does include the 165 and 166. And then once this process is concluded, we will start that phase 2 process and looking at the subdivision regulations, our sign code, some street trees, and some various other things as well, which would also then include a parking and dedication ordinance, which I know is something that we've talked about for a little bit. But through this process, we've worked with the steering committee. There's been a few members of the Planning and Zoning Commission who were on that steering committee, also some members with the Board of Adjustment, and then various city staff members who have worked on that. Chris, the consultants, also held some stakeholder interviews with some key people around town a few times, and we did hold a public meeting on Thursday, April 29th. I want to say that was last Thursday, but it was 2 Thursdays ago. And the comments from that meeting have been included in your packet here tonight. So also pointed out, obviously, we're working off a work plan that was adopted by the commission. There's various elements of that are included within this, and I've included all those in the memo. I'm not going to go over those in detail. The last thing before I give it over to Chris, 2 things. There is another request as part of this process. We did get a request to look at possibly allowing for daycare facilities, childcare facilities within industrial zoning districts. And I know once we get to that point, we can speak a little bit more on that, but I just wanted to make it clear that that was in your packet. What the council did with that request is they did ask the commission to take a look at that But as doing that, they did ask that we kind of incorporate this into this process and not create two parallel processes that would be ongoing. So I just wanted to point out that that was in there. As I mentioned, kind of during the last item, once we're through all of this and we kind of get some direction on the zoning district boundaries, we are going to have to look at updating our zoning map, and we're already starting to work on that a little bit, but we do anticipate bringing that to you for a recommendation at your next meeting here in June. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Chris, and I know he's got a presentation to give, and then we can go through everything after that.
Okay, great. You guys comfortable if I remove my mask? Okay. I am vaccinated, so for what that's worth. All right. Chair and commission members, I'm Chris Shires with Confluence, the city's consultant on this project, assisting you with crafting your new code update. Obviously, you had a lot on the agenda tonight. I'm going to try to go through this quickly, but please stop me if there's something you want to go into greater detail. We can also pull up the entire code draft and review it. But I'm not going to go through it page by page. I'd love to, but that would take a long time and you get tired of hearing me. So for this, for tonight, I'm going to talk a little bit about why we're doing this, some of the major components, the update process, and then review those chapters, stopping at some key things, even a few items you guys discussed tonight. So why are we doing this? Well, several reasons. One, it's about time. There's some things in the code that do need to be updated. We want to improve that predictability and the consistency and application of the code. In fact, one of the things you are struggling with is just those differences between the residential zoning districts. So we're trying to keep it a little bit simpler, breaking them out into pieces, updating to address some of the changes in what state law says we can and cannot do, as well as some federal case law, and to really implement the long-term goals of your newly adopted comprehensive plan. So we did start out last August, so we're almost up on 1 year with just a simple 4-step process. Using the good work of an advisory committee that really provided some valuable input. Our stakeholders that we interviewed were very helpful in giving us ideas and feedback. And even our last public workshop, we made many changes that were brought up during that. So in phase 1, and Charlie kind of talked about it, on the screen are some of the major components we're updating. So I'm just going to jump ahead again to phase 2. So next budget year, what are we going to work on? Just you wait, sign code. That's a lot of fun. So we're going to wrestle on that one. The subdivision update, and then some of those other little things we'll throw in there. Parkland dedication ordinance, as well as wireless communication facilities and some streetscape standards. So here's a list of all those 9, if you will, updated subchapters. We did kind of break the code up a little bit. There's a few new chapters in there as well. I'm going to just hit the highlights. And so that first subchapter, it's all that title, purpose, the use of the ordinance, boilerplate, legal language. We often don't look at it too much. But we're also establishing the different zoning districts. So I wanted to talk a little bit about that right now. We're going from 13 different zoning districts down to 11, so consolidating just a bit. You had 2 ag districts, turning it into 1. The residential districts were a little maybe confusing, and I guess we're kind of making it a little more, we call it pyramidal in nature, but a little bit broken up. So R1, the new R1 district, think single family residential home, single family detached. R2, think townhome row house. R3, think apartments. And then you can only step back 1 layer from that. I'll have another table that'll explain that in a little greater detail. You had 2 different PUD, planned unit development districts that were maybe not as flexible as you might need a PUD to do. So we just created a new PUD district. And then we updated your office and 2 retail districts, or 1 retail district, to kind of mean what they are. So neighborhood scale retail, so C1 is now neighborhood commercial. And then instead of C3 being most of your downtown area, let's just call it the downtown mixed use C3 zoning district. So in that subchapter 2, procedures and amendment enforcement, this is just how we do it. So how does the commission act? How does the Board of Adjustment act? Everything needs a building permit. Everything needs some type of a site permit. The roles of Charlie as your zoning administrator, the roles of the Board of Adjustment. We have to have a certificate of occupancy for new buildings and change of use, how we amend the code, the application process, keeping it very flat and simple so that you as a more administrative or at the council approval level can determine fees and the actual application. There's an entire section on definitions. We did a lot of update to modernize the code definitions. So when you come across a new term somewhere in the chapter, in the zoning code in general, this is where we go. And then under general, and I'm not going to run through those unless somebody has a specific question. And then under general provisions, we really start hitting into some meat. And so we have the how we determine, or what do we mean by different types of setbacks, lot shapes, calculations, and then most importantly, the accessory buildings and structures. And so those are like garages and sheds. We have fences, then how we deal with nonconformities and nonconforming uses. So a couple things I wanted to note under accessory buildings and structures, because we did talk about this at length at the public workshop. This applies to single family, townhome, row house, apartments, or I'm sorry, not apartments. Everything else is not necessarily an accessory structure. To kind of make it easier for you at the site plan process, because everything else is definitely coming in for site plan approval, whereas single family homes, duplexes, not necessarily, townhomes, row houses, yes. And so in essence, can't have a garage in front of your house, unless of course it's attached and it's a part of the house. Can't have a shed in front of your house. They're all supposed to be in the rear yard. We have language on how we deal on corner lots. One change we made, and I have it highlighted, is that making it very clear that everything's got to be behind the house, the principal structure. Can't be in the side yard with the exception of the detached garage, but it still can't be any closer to the front. There was concern about having sheds in the side yard. Then the zoning district. So our chapter, subchapter 5 is the biggest chapter, has a lot in there. Talk about all the rules and regulations for those zoning districts, and broke them into some tables we can look at instead of having to flip through all these different pages. So we have our bulk regulations, setbacks, density standards for residential, for everything that's not residential, and then what is permitted and what are our special uses. We also have, and I highlighted some of these other standards for our small wind energy system. So small wind turbines, you already have that in your code, so we transfer that over. We spent some extra time working on your solar energy ordinance, that section. We have that thing about accessory dwelling units, home occupations, how we deal with some businesses that we sometimes want a little more regulation. So delayed deposit credit institutions are check cashing places, or pawn shops, or medical cannabis oil dispensaries. I won't read all of this, but just so you know what's in your code, is it's a one-stop shop in looking for what are my minimum lot sizes, density standards, setbacks, building height standards. And in this case, for the residential zoning districts, we break it by use type. Because you think in an A1 or an R1, and in some cases an R2, I could have a single family house. So instead of having a different set of standards for each one of those zoning districts, we're saying that this is the standard for single family. And the same thing with two family, a townhome, a row house, and multifamily, so think apartments, and then non-residential buildings in a residential zoning district, typically a school building, a church, maybe a government facility. Same thing then for those other zoning districts, the commercial and industrial. In that case, it doesn't matter as much the use, they're more standard applied by zoning district. In particular, you notice C3, which is our downtown mixed use. We don't have those building setbacks. We do want things pushed to the property lines. Now, instead of how the code is today, which is actually quite a pain to go through, we're putting in a big table what uses are permitted by each zoning district, and then what are special use permits that can be requested from the Board of Adjustment. We're not doing use exceptions or use variances. These are certain types of uses that might be appropriate if they meet a certain test following the public hearing and review by the Board of Adjustment and the Board of Adjustment only. So in this, I might just take a little second to kind of show that residential area. So across the top are the zoning districts, and across the left column are all the different uses kind of broken into major categories. So we have agricultural uses, and then we break it out. Then a little bit further down, residential uses, household living, So single family detached permitted in ag R1, R2. That's your traditional single family house. Single family dwellings that are detached. Think of that as a duplex where you could have individual separate ownership of each duplex unit because there's two different lots. They're just sharing a common line. Might be with a special use permit approved in R1, but is permitted in R2 and R3. And then you have your 2 units on 1 lot. Some people call it a duplex, but for the purpose of this code, we're just calling it a 2-family dwelling. So in that case, you don't have separate ownership of the units. Permitted in R2 and R3 only. Townhome dwelling, also a row house, has to be at least 3 units attached. Otherwise, it would be a 2-family, 3 units attached, permitted in R2, R3. But then you see here where we get to the multifamily. So think of that as apartments, and they're normally stacked. It's only permitted in the R3 zoning district. We have our own manufactured home park zoning district like you do today. And then those accessory dwelling units. And this is where sometimes we call them a mother-in-law suite, a granny flat, college loft. It's where somebody can have a separate dwelling unit, its own bedroom, living space, kitchen, say above your garage, in your basement, or in a completely detached structure. Could be something allowed in all those regular zoning districts, A1, R1, R2, but needs review by the Board of Adjustment, making sure we meet certain standards first. Now, I'm not going to go through the whole table because it is lengthy, but we're going to bring up the one regarding daycares. But we did add electric vehicle charging stations as a permitted use in all the commercial and industrial districts. That came up during our review process. So with that, let me go back. So there was that, I don't know if the commission has any ideas or direction for us on should we have basically childcare centers, so not an in-home daycare, but childcare centers, so commercial daycare, obviously licensed by the state as a commercial daycare center, as a permitted use in M1 and M2, so our light and general industrial zoning districts.
Yeah,
Charlie, you might want to-
and I can add to that. And again, that's the request that we did receive on that. You know, as we've looked through this, and it's funny sometimes how when you're going through things, you get more information as you go along. We've been getting a lot of information, especially recently from the Greater Des Moines Partnership, on just the shortage of daycares around there. And I'm sure that most people are aware that, you know, we have a shortage in the state, probably even nationwide, but definitely local too, just a shortage of daycare units. And as I've looked through this, I mean, there's both, I think, positives and negatives to allowing daycare units with industrial zoning districts. I mean, sometimes industrial zoning districts, and depending on the property that you're looking at, can have conditions that may not lend itself to want to be right next to a daycare facility. Sometimes there's heavy traffic associated with certain industrial uses that don't necessarily intermingle too well with you know, the traffic associated with daycare facilities and drop-offs and everything like that. But at the same time, there's a lot of areas, especially in Indianola and industrial areas, where I think they do lend themselves pretty well. And I think the coexisting of the two can occur. So as I think through it from my standpoint, and if this was an individual request, I think the recommendation we would be making to you is to look at allowing them in industrial zoning districts, but by special use permit. That way, we do have a little bit of regulation on it still. We're not just saying, sure, we're going to allow for them in every industrial zoning district, no matter what the condition is. At least with this, we have the opportunity then to take a look at, you know, what are the surrounding conditions, what are the surrounding uses, you know, what are those traffic patterns, what do we allow, and be able to make a decision off that. And again, just so everybody here is aware, and I know it's in the code if you read it, but special use permits are something that is reviewed by the Board of Adjustment, not by the Planning and Zoning Commission. That's by state code. That is something that is required to be reviewed by the Board of Adjustment. So yeah, I think we kind of want to get commission's feedback on that as we're moving forward, and if that would be something that would be considered, and we can make that change before we take it to the council, if it is something that you're willing to consider.
I remember on the steering committee when we talked about that. I think all of us kind of thought, little kids, big heavy trucks, not compatible. But since then, I talked to Charlie about it. I talked to my wife about it. And I thought about it more. And I really think doing it by special use permit is the way to go. And that way it can be more specific to the individual site where the proposed child care center would be. Also, if you look in the future, if we have a major industry that shows up, they might want to have child care on site. That is a growing trend in business and industry, is having child care on site for employees. And so I personally think we ought to recommend that we put an S, 2 S's in that table for special use permit for child care in M1 and M2.
Yeah, I guess I'd like to share as well. I'm on the steering committee, and Al said it very eloquently. I guess I'll just say ditto. Al, I think it's allowed. Had the same concerns initially after doing more research, talking with Charlie. I think it's exactly what special use is for. And we'd be remiss not to look at opening up this opportunity for business in town.
Well, and I agree. I think that first preconceived notion is very different than the way that these spaces are actually being used in Indianola. And so those concerns wouldn't apply.
I guess, how about this? Just, we don't need to vote on this. So as part of your vote at the end of the meeting tonight, should you want this to go forward to council, that could be a part of the motion. We just want to make sure collectively, are we headed in the right? Does anybody else have another opposing comment to that? Okay, great. Well, let's keep moving on. And one thing I would note, in your home occupation section, we did mirror state law that as long as you are a licensed child development home or in-home daycare per their licensing standards, that you could be a permitted home occupation to kind of limit conflicts, and that is a large source of childcare in most communities. Okay, we spent a lot of time on the solar energy systems. It's a new code provision. It's something not addressed in your code today. And a lot of that debate revolved around, do we only do roof mounted or building mounted equipment, such on the right side of the screen, or do we also be more permissive on the ground mounted? And so in this case, we kind of split the baby a little bit. The roof and building mounted would be permitted by right, whole building permit. Certain situations, a commercial property would still need, say, a site plan. And we'll talk about those site plan types later. But then the ground mounted would require a special use permit from the Board of Adjustment. And then we copied some provisions from this Iowa solar model ordinance to try to address some aesthetic considerations without going maybe too far. And I'm happy to kind of go into anything greater detail related to that. And so it addresses things like height, setback, visibility, and actually kind of waives the lot coverage provision, because we, in a single family situation, you consider a freestanding solar array would be an accessory structure. So from a setback standard, that applies, but we're not making it count against the lot coverage requirements. That might be a little too prohibitive. Okay, questions on that we want to go through before I keep moving on? Okay.
I just really quick want to note on that solar provision, that public meeting, there was quite a bit of discussion on that. Ultimately, to begin with, and I don't remember what the standard we had at that point was on ground mounted, but I think you had a certain number of acres before we even allowed for it. But we got a lot of feedback, and I think you saw in your comments that were included in the packet that there was quite a bit of feedback on there. So it was pretty split, to be quite honest, on the feedback, even at the public meeting. Some people said we shouldn't allow it. Some people said we should. But like Chris said, I think the compromise to those comments that we got in was, let's do it by special use. That allows us again to look at the area, see if it's appropriate. Does it work in the setting that it's being proposed in, all of that stuff before allowing it to be used. So.
All right, let's talk a little bit about site plan, because here's one part that is definitely going to impact you as a commission. So we have in the code today a site plan procedures and requirements section. We've kind of expanded this a little bit and broke it out into a few pieces. So I want to talk about the application and application types. Otherwise, most of this section is really consistent with your current code. So if you're an ag-related building structure or related to single family, like a single family garage or detached garage or fence or something like that, you're still at that building permit level. We're not changing that. However, in most everything else required some type of a site plan. We're breaking it into two parts: a major site plan, you're doing something significant or brand new, and then a minor site plan where you're doing a small building addition or some modifications to a site. So typically a commercial or nonprofit, not a single family residential or an ag-related site. The major modification would require commission review and then city council approval following your review. Whereas that minor site plan, if it follows all the zoning code requirements, and meets our standard as a minor site plan, could be administratively reviewed by your zoning administrator. The special use permit and the site plan that typically comes along with the special use permit would only be the purview, would only be reviewed by the Board of Adjustment, kind of as a nod back to what state law is telling us, as well as some case law. So hopefully that kind of clear as mud. So you're gonna start seeing site plans, at least the major ones. And on occasion, Charlie might throw one up that's a minor one, but maybe it's a little controversial and he wants you guys to weigh in. Okay.
And I think that is just, it's a good thing to point out, because right now the only site plans that the commission are seeing are those site plans where there's a modification of some sort that's being requested. And I think before we go forward on this, I just want to make sure that the commission is aware now any site plan that we get. So when we're looking at site plans for Cabin Coffee that came in, for Ace Hardware, for Scooters Coffee, for Dollar Tree, all of those site plans would come forward to the commission in a similar fashion that we do with preliminary plats today, where analysis that we provide, recommendations and all of that. So it does sometimes provide a few more agenda items to your agendas. And on a night like tonight, that might not be favorable, but on most nights, I think we can handle it. But just want to make sure that everybody's okay with that.
Yeah, and really reinforcing the important job of the commission to vet things, verify that your staff's doing their job. I'm sure you will. But then, vet things for the council and give them your recommendation. Okay. All right, moving right along, let's talk a little bit about off-street parking. Right now, everything about parking lots not in the street is kind of spread throughout the code, depending on which zoning district you're in. It's a little bit of a mess. So we're consolidating it in one area. And we have some kind of basic standards in there, just verifying all parking has to occur on a paved surface. You can't be parking on the grass. There is a parking table that lists how many parking spaces you need based on the use. There's also a clear setback table. What's your setback from the street right away from your neighbors? We also allow some alternative ways to calculate parking. Sometimes it's not as easy as what the table says. We do have a requirement for bike parking for retail and office buildings that are larger than 5,000 square feet. And then here's one that I hope most people can get on board with, is a requirement that similar uses, say a fast food restaurant next to a fast food restaurant, a strip mall or a retail building next to a retail building, must interconnect their parking lots. Nothing's more frustrating than you're leaving a building, a retail store, you got to drive back out on the highway and just immediately turn. So where it's mutually beneficial. So I wouldn't say, and what the ordinance doesn't say is a church has to connect to a McDonald's. That would be reasonable. We're talking similar commercial uses. And then we also established some standards, and here's a little graphic to try to explain it. Talking about residential driveway widths. The big thing here is trying to neck them down once they hit the street right away. They can still be wide. If you got a 3-4 car garage, they can still widen out to that. You can still add a little parking wing off to one side. But so we don't have these really, really wide curb cuts everywhere, necking them down. And that specific 24-foot standard might adjust when we do the subdivision regulation standard updates. We spent a little more time on specific street design standard with Public Works, but 24 foot is probably a good starting point as a max at the street right away. Obviously, the street apron itself gets a little bit wider.
And really quick, I just want to point it out in this one, because the commission is not aware of this. When the Board of Adjustment is reviewing variances as of late, especially, I would say 80 to 90% of the variances that are being reviewed are driveway width, because currently we limit to 20 feet on a driveway, or if you have extra frontage, no more than 25% of your front yard. So anytime anybody wants to add an extra third car stall onto their driveway, they've got to come to the Board of Adjustment for variance. And they're always getting approved. And one of the things that any planner will say this, I mean, when you're reviewing the same variance over and over and over again and approving the same variance over and over and over again, it's time to make a change. So the other one, and it was kind of discussed here earlier, on the accessory buildings, is just the height of accessory buildings. So between driveways and height of accessory buildings, we're constantly reviewing those variances. This code does potentially, I shouldn't say potentially, it will decrease the number of variances that we're seeing. We may potentially see some more, but I would imagine this would cut those variances probably by 75%.
Yeah, in fact, one thing I meant to say early on in this presentation is in a year, maybe two, we should come back and look at this code and see what are little things you want to adjust and fix. That is a common typical thing. We often say we draft this to a 90th percentile. You can never draft a code that's absolutely perfect. You're trying to get most things, and over time you're going to decide something you didn't like or something you want to be a little less strict or more strict on. Okay. Next, another new chapter is this thing on open space, landscaping, and buffering. It's to establish some very specific landscape standards, in fact, to memorialize the landscape requirements you have, say, for new single family development. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that, and then some buffering provisions between dissimilar uses, retail business up against residential, something like that. So single family right now, 2 trees, 4 shrubs per new lot at time of occupancy. It's just memorializing what you have. Everything else, we do have a open space standard established. So many square percent of open space required for a site. And then for every 2,000 square foot of that required open space, 1 shade tree, overstory tree, 2 ornamental trees, and 2 shrubs. And we've done some definitions of what all that is. Added some very specific standards for landscaping within parking lots. So think this is Hy-Vee, Walmart, your big parking lots, that they have to have those islands on the end rows. You have to have sidewalks connecting through. We have to have landscaping within those islands. And then if they front out along the street, we want so many shade trees and ornamental trees per linear foot. And then this one's a little more controversial, but this headlight screen, as we typically call it, within that parking lot setback out along the street. And it can be created through a combination of shrubs, ornamental grasses, low wall, masonry wall, berming, earth berming. And here's a little graphic kind of showing that. That can have a big, big impact on just how a site looks, sometimes even more so than building architecture. So just a couple images where you see this shot on the left, kind of greening up a very massive parking lot, and the shot on the right that, you know, you can still put kind of a green screen even in front of a C-store, and it's still successful because you can see between the canopy. But you can see underneath the tree and above the shrub to clearly see in what the use is, its signage. It comes down to site design. Okay, and then the last one's a really lengthy chapter. I can go through all these slides or hit the highlights. So I'll start with hitting the highlights. So this is all about building design standards and being very specific. But to do that, we have to define a whole lot of things up front. So you have these general provisions. We talk about building materials, and then how do we apply those building materials by zoning and use type, by building type. And so this is going to apply to new construction and additions that are greater than 20%. So we're not beating up existing buildings. We want to prohibit things like sometimes poor architecture. So building facadism, fake facades that kind of look silly. I had images too. That we applying those building materials in an authentic, real way, and then we're doing equipment screening. And so On these the images here on the right, that's kind of an example of building facadism, that little brick or brack that really provides no good to the building, added expense without getting us anywhere. That we, if we're going to use thin brick, thin veneer stone, that it looks real. It's just how you apply it. It's quality installation. You're going to build a nice building. Why not, screen the mechanical units, the meters, piping, things like that. So the image above is a really nice masonry, really well done building that the mechanical contractor got excited and shoved the gas meters as well as the rusty gas pipe right upside the building. It's currently streaking on that brick too, by the way, because I drive by this all the time. And that is a street view too. That's street facing. That when appropriate, when architecturally appropriate, a little bit of trim goes a long way without adding a lot of extra cost. And that bottom image is really saying heavy material on the bottom, lighter materials on the top. You don't put stone above brick, unless it be some real special architectural style, but Bob can correct me. And then here we talk about wall and wall articulation, just a little bit of movement in and out on the wall plane, especially in this case, differentiating between each unit can have a huge impact. That picture above, that's all vinyl siding and vinyl trim. So we're not talking, it's got to be some kind of really expensive product necessarily, but those changes to the roof line, the in and out, those porches really make a big difference. So the next section of this chapter, we talk about building materials and we break them into categories. I'll spend just a little bit of time going through them, and we class them as 1, 2, 3, or 4. So 1 and 2, those are those are the great materials you want to have a lot of. The 3, that's kind of a standard material that might make up the bulk, the sides and back of the building. And class 4 is a less desirable material. Maybe it's a little bit of a trim element that we're trying not to have a lot of. So this is all broken down by category. So we have things that are masonry and stone, so real brick, thin brick veneer, brick paneling, and we just kind of class them accordingly to their value. Some of this is a value judgment. So as a commission, over time especially, you may change your opinion on one of these products, especially if somebody brings in something that's a little bit new. Hey, we've updated this product. It looks a lot better, lasts a lot better. And so there's some flexibility to make some adjustments for that. We have concrete block in all its different forms. We have concrete, so think tilt-up concrete panel, precast, cast in place. It can be very, very high-end, and it can also be very, very cheap. And then different types of metal. Metal's another one where there's architectural grade of metal panel that's incredibly high-end, very expensive, very, very nice. Can make a very quality office building. And of course, then there's the wrinkled tin that maybe you don't want to see, an old barn stock. And then glass is typically clear glass is kind of always a class 1 material, something we like to see a lot of. And then it's different forms. We have all of our other materials. One we normally spend a lot of time fighting about is, vinyl siding, and I totally lost it here. My ethos, which is a synthetic stucco. We use a lot of ethos in construction typically, and some people love it, some people hate it. Typically, the ethos suppliers love it. It also is really easy to install, and you can do a lot of different building shapes and forms. And over time, that may be one of those materials that we start to value up, because like the folks that drive it are making a stronger cladding, a heavier, thicker cladded ethos that you can hit with a hammer and not just have it shatter. Okay, so by building type, so ag, single family, townhome, row houses, apartments, commercial, and so forth. In the code, we talk about you have to have so much of each different types of material on the street-facing facade. So we're not trying to beat up all the sides of the building. And in fact, in ag and single family, we're basically saying there are no specific regulations for building materials. We don't start getting into that until we talk about townhomes and row houses. And in this case, they have to have at least 3 different class 1, 2, or 3 building materials on their front facade. Has to have a deck. And then each individual living unit, like these pictures show, kind of has to be differentiated. And then for apartments, we go up a little bit. We say 3 different class 1 and 2 building materials. So that would be glass. So in this case, they have glass and they have brick, and then there's a stone base making up 40%. And that's probably about 40% because they've gone pretty heavy on the windows. Every unit has to have some type of a functional porch, patio, deck, rooftop, outdoor space, rooftop amenity deck or outdoor amenity space. This is to address one of the concerns I heard about a certain product type in your town. So let's make sure they have that usable outdoor space. And then we also want that facade broken up, in this case, at least every 60 feet. And then non-residential buildings in residential districts, schools, churches, things like that. A little bit higher standard, upping it to 50% class 1 and 2 materials on that street-facing facade. And then it just keeps going from there. Retail, commercial buildings up a little bit higher yet, 75% class 1 and 2 materials on the street-facing facade. Often it's easier for them to hit this because they're going to do a lot more windows. Office buildings. In fact, one thing I did want to note, you see there on the retail buildings, we want at least 20% clear glass on that first floor street facing or entry. Most retailers are doing that. This will help you with a couple of retailers who tend to get less excited about having people be able to see into their businesses. And so it tends to be a real valuable thing to most regular retail businesses. In fact, in like a downtown district, sometimes we say 50%, or we get 75% or 80%. Office buildings, we don't do that. We pull that back down a little bit. Mixed use buildings, there's where we kind of push up the standard just a little bit more again. And then industrial, the last one I'll show you, we pull it way back down because they're industrial buildings. They are what they are. In this case, we still have that primary facade, that street-facing facade, 2 different materials. So it could be just glass and a quality tilted concrete. Together, making up 80% of that front facade. And then with that kind of breaking up the wall every 100 feet. Okay, that was a lot to run through. Is there anything anybody wants me to go through in more detail? I didn't want to take all of your night. And I can pull up the whole code too and show it on the screen as well.
Which we did with the steering committee.
Oh yeah, yeah. We should really
done.
praise those folks a little bit more for their work. In fact, specifically, several of them spend a lot of extra time providing even additional comments too.
I do have one specific.
Please.
I talked to Charlie about this earlier, and I think in the existing code related to fences and walls,
Oh, okay.
I think in the existing code, it states specifically that if you want to construct a fence or a wall, it has to be contained entirely upon your property. That's not in here. I think that should be added.
Yeah.
I mean, it's common sense and you kind of assume it, but it's not clearly stated. Now, it's clearly stated that the good side's got to be out on fence, which I think we all remember making that change, but I think we ought to be pretty clear that if you're going to construct a fence or a wall, it's got to be all on your property.
And I think there's 2 ways to look at that. One, I do not disagree with you at all, and I'm very much happy to add that, because typically, like when I used to issue or deal with fence permits, that was what I'd say, hey, just have it just inside your property line so you can define ownership. But it's also not uncommon on a shared property line to have it on the property line. And then you look at state law and case law on kind of that shared ownership responsibility. But I kind of like the idea, let's just make it clear. So the city's not in there wrestling a fence dispute.
Yeah, and I mean, that's typical what we tell people is, if you know where your property pins are and you run a string between those 2 property pins, as long as the fence is on your side of that string, that's good. I mean, that's what we would consider to be wholly on someone's property. Sometimes you're getting down into some very minor details with fencing, but yeah, I know our current code, and we carried most of it over, and I did look at that after hours, and we didn't have that on there. So I think just adding that wholly on your property thing, it doesn't hurt by any means.
Anything else? Anybody have any objections to that right now? That's probably pretty easy one. Anybody listening in? Bob was super helpful too, by the way. Well, that's all I have for presentation. I'm happy to take a seat and run up and answer any questions or do whatever you guys want. But I have written down those two things related to fence must be wholly on your property and a special use permit in M1 and M2 for child care centers, the commercial ones.
Okay, so Charlie, what is the action we need to take?
So this is, I kind of put this similar into what the comprehensive plan was. I mean, and I know with the comprehensive plan, there was quite a bit of review and it took a few meetings with the commission to get through some stuff. This is a little bit different as you're now creating the regulations that we built based off the policy of the comprehensive plan. So at some point, and if that is tonight, and noting that there's not too much objection, I think it's appropriate that it's tonight. There needs to be a formal recommendation from the commission to have these be our new zoning and site plan codes. So yeah, it's, if we've ever done those, you're familiar with those individual things that we've done in the past where we're looking at, zoning text amendments, zoning code amendments. This is just a giant zoning amendment. So we are going to essentially strike the existing code and replace it with the new code.
Any comments or questions?
I think my only question is with that communication, I think it's more of a comment. Would it be a this day forward? And so that's a future date that we would tell the community effective 60 days from now, 90 days from now, whatever that effective date is, because that does change some planning. I mean, you think about just building a home and maybe some of the things that they hadn't planned for. So what would we anticipate that timeline look like?
Yep. So I've looked at this. So obviously the commission is making a recommendation to the city council. The city council actually has to consider this for 3 readings. So 3 different meetings, they have to consider this. We also have to set a public hearing ahead of time. So if a recommendation is forwarded this evening by the commission, as soon as the city council can review this, I believe is on June 7th. That's their first meeting in June. So then we would be looking at final adoption at their first meeting in July, which would be right after the 4th of July holiday. From there, as I mentioned earlier, we're also looking at the new zoning map. So we're trying to get these kind of run together somewhat concurrently, but the intention is that commission reviews regulations tonight, zoning map at their next meeting, then city council, when they have when they have second consideration of these changes, they will then have first consideration of the zoning map. So if you're following me here, the zoning map would then be officially adopted at their second meeting in July. And again, I don't know what that day is, that second Monday, or the third Monday in July. So we're looking at then potentially just having a clean August 1st, sorry, I can't talk today, August 1st implementation date with the new changes. So from there, typically what we'll do with this level of change, I think, once we get through the first consideration with council, we staff will then have a little bit better feeling of how we're moving on this, and knowing at that point that council probably doesn't have too many major changes. If they don't, we will then start that communication piece early in June and give everybody notice on that, and then have that August 1st kind of be that implementation date. So then the other thing I would add to that is when we're reviewing applications, it's going to be kind of really imperative on staff at that point to determine what gets reviewed under the old regulation and what gets reviewed under the new regulation. Because just because somebody is submitting something on, let's say, August 2nd, after the regulations go into effect, that doesn't mean that for the past 2 to 3 months as they've been planning a project, they haven't been looking at the old zoning regulations. So There's going to be that lag period, you know, for a few months, maybe a little bit more, where we're just going to have to determine what gets reviewed under old regulations and what gets reviewed under new regulations. But also knowing then if we have pre-development meetings well ahead of time that we can give, you know, developers possibly, hey, here's the new code, let's follow this, because when you submit this, it's potentially going to be middle August. We're going to want to review it under this code. So striking that balance in there, it's not always easy. We did that with the comp plan, going between the old comp plan and the new comp plan for a few months. And here we are a year later, and we're completely through that process. So does that answer your question? I know I'm a little long-winded, but.
Yep, nope, exactly.
Any other questions or comments?
And just again, to be clear on your motion, and now I'm thinking about it, I know we didn't have anything in that memo about what the motion would be, but again, essentially, I think our recommendation based off the discussion that's happened tonight would be to recommend these changes to the council for approval, probably with two conditions. One, the point that Al made about the fence, and then if there needs to be more discussion about it, or if you're comfortable moving that condition forward on the daycare and allowing those as special uses within the industrial district, we will get those changes made and then push that on to council.
Would someone like to make a motion?
All right, I will make a motion to recommend the amendments to chapter 165 zoning regulations and chapter 166 site plan with the two additions discussed. One regarding fencing and the second one regarding special use permit for childcare in our M zoning classes.
Do we have a second?
Sure enough. Second.
Any further discussion before we take it to a vote? All right, Courtney?
Josh Rigg,
Yes.
Misty Solowich,
Yes.
Sarah Ritchie,
Yes.
Al Ferris,
Yes.
Aaron Freeberg,
Yes.
Becky Needles,
Yes.
Bob Ormsby.
Yes.
All right. Agenda item 8, comments, building permit report.
Yeah, I don't really have anything to add. The reports are in there. If there's any particular questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
As well as with current projects. We'd entertain a motion to adjourn.
I'll make a motion to adjourn. Bob.
This is Becky. I'll second.
All in favor?
Bye.
Thank you.
Good night. Thank you, guys.
Good night. Have a good night, everyone.